Hello, my name is Gianna Olinger, and here's a deal with the built environment and accessibility at Lehigh. In this episode, I will be talking with Christina Jang. We will discuss her work in social justice and architecture, along with how those at Lehigh have reacted to inaccessible environments, and what we can do as a community to change that narrative. Christina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Christina Jang. I teach architecture, design, theory, and social justice in the Department of Art, Architecture, and Design at Lehigh. And through design, we discuss how we can make the built environment a more just and fair place.
Mm-hmm. So, could you talk about your experience in combining architecture with social justice in aspects like disability?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the study of architectural space is inseparable from people's need. And historically, it's very driven by philosophy, by social orders, and to a very specific audience because it's shaped in Europe, a lot of the architectural history and studies. So in the contemporary time architecture, we're trying to shift the angle away from the historical angle, but more current contemporary evolving need angle. And I do a lot of work with communities. A lot of these spatial needs have to start from completely changing or reshaping how we understand what people need in space and with their bodies. So I do a lot of work through community mapping, community workshops with local communities, a lot of disabled people, but also their caregivers, the loved ones who live with people with disabilities, all of them have these really rich knowledge about how they use space and how space either create barriers or facilitate a better social, spatial, urban experience for people with disabilities.
That's awesome, especially having the people like caretakers and people kind of extended from that have a say in it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you implement accessibility in your current teachings here at Lehigh? Does it play a role in the assignments or teaching style, or is it something that students pick up as they learn?
Yeah, so it's in many different ways. Whatever I teach, when I teach even just design skills, drawing skills, I try to have students learn these skills through like real world explorations. So usually I introduce the topic of disability experience, diverse experience, cultural experience as a topic that students have to critically understand and design for. So they understand accessibility from a theoretical and intellectual angle. That's one thing. Another aspect is when they learn use their own various backgrounds and knowledge and bodily experience, they can use their lived experience as a lens to understand accessibility. And it's not just limited to diagnosed disabilities. People who have different communication styles, have different styles of thinking, conceiving space. I try to foster that everyone can have their own unique angle, and that's sort of encouraged as a designer anyways. So we try to say that, drawing is a method of communication. Drawing is public speaking. Not everyone has to be the best speaker, the most eloquent, thinker. People can think through different durations of time, through thoughtful drawing, through different forms of making and communication.
That's really cool and super insightful. And it's really awesome to hear that as a professor, you try to make sure that everybody's ability to access the work, ability to present, isn't hindered by a difficulty that might have been like a difficulty in the past with others.
Definitely.
Your architecture and art experience is amazing. I did read through the Home for the Blind project that you won the award for, which is awesome.
Thank you.
I find it fascinating that your designs use structure to create these rooms that can create atmospheres that can be felt, like the warmth, the depth of the ceilings, making sounds echo different. Are there any type of factors in the built environment that can make a space more or less accessible like this that people may not think of?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely every angle. It's definitely way beyond ramps and, like wheelchair access. Every moment where human body, that human body goes through from the state of infant, like learning to crawl for the first time, to learning to perceive space and have developed spatial navigation and learn to read social cues or like signage and visual cues. All of these are aspects that shape how people experience space, and we often overlook, right? Like we understand ourselves as like adults, mobile bodies. But then, when we think back, there's so many different phases where we found spaces confusing. We couldn't understand certain aspects of, space, and spaces sometimes create these inconveniences that we learn to adapt to, but they didn't need to be there. So I try to emphasize that, like when we talk about disability and accessibility, it's not just, like for a blind person, we think about vision. For a deaf person, we think about hearing. It's way beyond that. Everyone perceives space through smell, through sound, through light. Even like, people with low vision can perceive the warmth of light in different forms. And the cues like sound of birds is a cue of time too. So all of these are important factors. And then, people with autism, how they perceive space often is very different, even individual to individual. So different ways to make space more comfortable for people is an important factor. And oftentimes it's important to acknowledge that accessibility needs are conflicting too, right? What might work for a person with hearing impairment might actually become an issue for people like who are blind, who use like, soft floor versus hard floor to navigate. So it's important to know how to make decisions and have priorities and mediate these different needs.
In cases like that, how do you try to determine priorities? Is it meeting with the students and trying to figure out something that works, or having like separate spaces?
I think a lot of it comes from active communication with these different groups. And usually, I think communication and learning through designing is as important as the end product. A lot of it is about, speaking with the actual users, why they value certain things, and whether they've thought of other alternatives. Like a person with hearing impairment might default to think that if you put a carpet, it can resolve a lot of issues. But what if there are other possibilities that happens on the ceilings, on the walls? So sometimes it's also just about holistically taking the time to listen and holistically understand and help each other understand how the different needs can coexist and be fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And a really great holistic way of thinking. I mean, we have so much technology now, like even in our recording studio here, we have a lot of these sound absorbing mats.
Yeah.
There's a lot of solutions that we didn't think of before, even like 1 year, months before. So it's great to have like a whole team essentially working on finding things to make the space just a little bit more friendly.
Yeah. There's also the social aspect too. It's not just about people being able to like use spaces. It's also about the general culture, like how to make people feel comfortable no matter how they navigate space. That's an important factor in our design too. Like we talk about cities, public spaces. Why can't disabled people like be more visible and access more areas and participate in as many social gatherings as possible too? So all of those are defined by space to a certain degree too.
I totally agree. And I was thinking before, like I am really interested in sustainability and also like activism movements. I love being able to participate in them. But I see so much criticism for others for like shaming people with disabilities, whether that be perceived or not. Why aren't you going to these protests? Why aren't you trying to be more like eco-friendly? And it really is so much. You're right. It's not the space, but it's the way that we talk about the space, even the way that we talk about people. The space is everything kind of.
Yeah, and it's not the most productive to set up like, like wars and conflicts between all of these important initiatives. Like caring about one initiative doesn't mean we're like, dismissing the others. And there are also, caring about disability versus caring about sustainability sometimes is about, like designing for blind versus designing for deaf. You should do both. Sometimes they're conflicting, but, you need to know what's more important for each person. Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
So I noticed you're in a few projects or team that I'm familiar with in the Bethlehem community and Lehigh. You did touch on them briefly, but what are some projects that include accessibility that you're currently involved with or students are?
Yeah, so I have two recent projects. One is an ongoing community-driven research project. One is a built project, and I can talk about both. The recent ongoing project I'm doing together with Professor Austin Duncan from College of Health and Professor Gianna Olinger from CAS, social psychology, is sort of like a mixed method interdisciplinary research to understand holistically the well-being of disabled residents of Bethlehem and in extension Lehigh Valley, how public spaces or urban spaces create barriers or facilitate their social well-being in cities. Because disability, a large part of it is that the well-being comes from how much they can participate in the actual everyday living of like positive social experience, and oftentimes disabled people are very excluded from these experiences. So we're understanding sort of through community mapping with local residents and ethnography interviews with them to understand how their disability experience and social experience and space intersect with one another so that we can identify ways to better support these communities, create better public spaces, better urban living experience to support disabled people in Lehigh Valley. Another example that talks about, actually it touches on both sustainability and disability or accessibility, is we recently built a rammed earth community kitchen for a deaf immigrant organization located in upstate or central New York. They're resettled refugees from a deaf community who are Nepali and Burmese. And they run this community farm where they grow their own cultural ingredients and sell them at local markets. And they wanted a community kitchen. So we proposed rammed earth on a farm, naturally as the most sustainable material to create this kitchen. And they cook mostly through like earth hearth anyways. But one thing we realized is that earth construction doesn't work well with deaf communities because the color of it is so close to skin tones. So it makes sign language really hard to read, especially in a group conversation with 10 people signing together. Mm-hmm. So we decided to find this natural mineral dye to dye the earth blue, so it creates more of a contrast with their skin tone. And it naturally became, like the discussion of earth and construction, as a sustainable choice, conflicted with the accessibility needs. But we could adapt it so it fulfills both. And in the end, the construction was built together with the deaf community, and the whole process was about celebrating both at the same time without setting up a false dichotomy that you have to choose one direction or the other.
Mm-hmm. That's so beautiful. How do you guys come to conclusions like that? Like creative thinking, is it usually someone with maybe years of experience versus someone with years of lived experience?
Yeah, I think it's all of those together. The reason why my research is often very unconventional or not follow the traditional scholarship pattern is that in architecture you can't separate lived experience from intuitive decision making from professional and technical knowledge. All of those, you have to know how to use them together. And this type of decision, maybe there's some type of mineral natural dye that could make earth blue, that could create a contrast with skin tone. All of these is very intuitive, but based on discussions, and it's accidental discovery from productive conversations and frictions.
That is so cool and super inspiring.
Thank you.
When in the first project, dealing with Bethlehem residents, mm-hmm. It can definitely be a sensitive issue for some, and especially getting those interviews with people.
Yeah.
How do you approach that in a way that, one, Bethlehem residents are comfortable with, and coinciding with that isn't paternalizing or mm-hmm. making sure that you are fully listening to the community? Yeah,
I think that's a very honest question, and the honest answer is that we have to be honest and acknowledge the harm researchers, typical academic researchers have done to local communities. A lot of people claim to do community engaged work more as a checkbox rather than, actually letting their knowledge drive the shaping of the research. There are a lot of reasons for it that, sometimes it's beyond our control. But our team, Austin, me, and Jin, were committed to actually, instead of extracting information, we have to position ourselves as collaborators, as, acknowledge our power dynamic, acknowledge the harm, our colleagues have done, and try our best to separate ourselves and position ourselves as someone who's trying to do research differently. So we did position ourselves that way when we first reached out to communities, that we know there are a lot of problematic research. They've been surveyed out. They've filled out like more than 10 surveys for different research initiatives. They don't need one more, which is also why when we designed our methodology for the research, like community mapping, ethnography interview, and network analysis, we want to make sure we're not using these sessions to just extract data. These research processes need to facilitate and be beneficial to the community itself, which is why, like for the community mapping, we provide food, and the questions we ask give space for people to make communities within, even when they attend these like research sessions. And sometimes you observe, like I ask a question and I'm anticipating certain answers, but people have spontaneous conversations and they started sharing resource with each other. And they started, sharing their own life stories, making connections. And as a researcher, even though you have your own agenda, you have to be careful and allow those type of community making to unfold, and keep in mind that you're not just there to get the most efficient data. You're actually there to participate in this community making process. So, and I think how honestly you come through can so easily be perceived by the participants, and if they understand you and trust you, then you can have a very easy relationship forward. Just have to be conscious of our own power and positions and problematic practices as researchers, and be honest with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's definitely that skill is vital for any type of, I would argue, any type of research, but especially any type of community-based research.
Yes.
I would also say it's a skill that takes time, but more so it takes empathy, and it takes knowing when to listen rather than talk.
Yeah.
Which that might not be second nature for a lot of people. When doing this type of work or engaging in it with students, if you do, how do you tackle that? Like, how do you prime students to know when it's best to listen to the community rather than think about your own project? Because it's really easy to fall into that.
Yeah.
Like, I need to get this done, and you forget to listen to everything going on around you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, luckily we've had really terrific student researchers working with us. They're all very aware, and they sort of participate in this type of research because they want to learn an ethical way of engaging with communities. So they have those premise and training. But I think an important part of it is that when we communicate with students and teach them about our research method, we explain the whole, very honest thought process. We're very honest about criticizing the existing forms of scholarship and why we choose to do it differently. And we invite students to observe the whole process. When Austin does his ethnography interviews, there's always an observer, a student who's both taking field notes, observing the situation, and learning from it. Mm-hmm. And when I do community workshops, if I have a community mapping session with 15 disabled people, and there are several blind residents who need people's help writing down their answers, or there are certain autistic participants who want to have a private conversation rather than join a group session, I have to designate individual students to work with individuals. So also through this type of very intense experience, they learn how to interact with individuals. And a lot of this trust also comes from the generosity of our participants, who are willing to teach students through their own experience, through their interactions with students.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's really powerful, especially since a lot of the culture of Lehigh has not been particularly friendly to the Southside community. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of trust for any residents, people who come to these meetings, to be able to be vulnerable and let people share and learn from these experiences.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, with the surveys, it's rough. People, a lot of the times, whether it be disabled or non-disabled, oftentimes deal with kind of being analyzed or being fed papers rather than being listened to. It gets exhausting.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you all have that bond and are able to pass that on to the students to continue this type of work. That's really powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one time we had a very big mapping session at the Bethlehem Public Library. And then at one point, there's like a very an elderly gentleman who talked a lot because he said he lived alone. And ever since he became disabled, he found it very difficult to talk with people or have opportunities to communicate. And he had this very long conversation with another participant who had all kinds of disabilities as well. And they had this very long private conversation just between the two of them. And in the end, they were like, this is our first time actually participating in a social event where you felt like everyone here shares the lived experience and have that level of understanding. And you didn't have to, explain yourself, but you could get the type of reassurance you've always needed. And it's more meaningful to see them bond than collecting data from them. And it's important to remind myself that, right, I don't need to listen to their private conversation to get the data out of it. It's more important to observe what happened. And that speaks more about what they need than what they tell me, as a list of data.
Mm-hmm. So it's also a mix of building structures and building community and knowing when to intervene with that space. That's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions that you would like to ask?
I wonder how supported disabled students feel at Lehigh, whether they're diagnosed or not. I think that's always a question. I try my best when students are willing to share with me. I find different ways to find the most productive experience for them in my classroom. But also, what are some existing infrastructure at Lehigh? Always be interesting to know.
Yeah. In our deal team, the disability experience at Lehigh, we do have some students kind of working on that, especially talking to people who may or may not be diagnosed and talking about their lived experiences, whether that be at Lehigh or even at home in different spaces, like you've said. It's a struggle for a lot, and especially, I don't want to speak on behalf of a lot of people, but especially at this time in college, especially being undergraduate, it's hard finding your place. And if you haven't had access to all these resources that Lehigh has, it can sometimes be a bit overwhelming, but it's also a struggle in finding which resources work best for you. It's trial and error. The disability office at Lehigh, from what I've heard, tries really, really hard to work with students. And I'm really grateful to hear that. But of course, like you're saying, all different types of needs, they conflict with each other. So there are some strengths of Lehigh, but some struggles, like even lighting, stuff like that. I think about that a bit.
Yeah.
Background noise. And it's something that can't always be changed, or people might not think to change when it comes to learning in the classroom or even interacting with students. We have a lot of professors who have different ways of thinking because they may be a bit older and just aren't used to maybe all of the abilities that we have to make spaces more accessible. So there's going to be that conflict of that. Do you feel like you see that in your work or with the professors that you talk to? Or I was wondering, in your research, do you deal with conflict, whether it come from spaces like risk management or other professors, and saying, we would like to make this in more of an extraction way?
Yeah, I think that's it's sort of inevitable in academia. That's how academia runs itself. Everything, even though higher education is supposed to be, this, a very altruistic and idealistic space. But in the end, you have to prove yourself by winning grants, making profits, creating transport technology that becomes patented. So obviously, all the faculty are under a lot of pressure to produce and prove your impact. So I understand this pressure, and it's true. It's very hard to resist this pressure and feel like I'd rather do the right thing, even though sometimes it might slow down my process and harm me. I think it takes a lot of experience to have the confidence and say that, it's going to be slow. It's going to take time to build trust, but this is worth it. And I know it's going to yield in some meaningful results that can still, serve me, both like, for my, personal goals in career as well as the community I believe in. So I think it also, I constantly have to remind myself that sometimes I'm like, I just really want to get this done. I have to write it in my annual review this year. But I have to remind myself what's more important and why I do this type of work. I don't want to do it in a compromised form, and I want to be authentic in what I claim to do and how I actually do it. And in the end, I feel like I am recognized for my methods. So I do think it takes a lot of like trust and reminding oneself. So I can't really criticize colleagues who choose to go like who are pressured under the pressure. They choose a more like a faster and extractive route. But I do think there's a shift in general culture. People are more and more aware of it, and with all these current discussions about extraction, being aware of the power dynamics and decolonizing the curriculum, people are more critical of extractive practices. And I feel like among the new faculty, when I went to the new faculty orientation 2 years ago when I joined Lehigh, I felt like everyone was at the same page. There's no need to talk about DEI anymore because, we're way above that. We don't need to be explained what equity is. So I do feel like with the new faculty coming in, the new generation of people in higher education is going to slowly change the culture. And I'm sure like when we're like 30 years later when we become the old school people, I'm hoping that things will keep getting better. And I hope that students can help shape it. And when I was undergrad, I was really angry. I saw a lot of problematic practices, and I tried to carve out my own route, find my own space to do something I believe in. And actually, it's at the time I felt like it was really unfair for me that I had to fight my own fights. The system should be set up to support me. But later on, I realized that sort of is the beginning of me knowing how to do things differently and find my own path. So it's also a valuable learning experience, and I do want to support like all students who are going through this difficult process of carving out a path for themselves. But it's valuable. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That is really powerful. Yeah. And especially, unfortunately, having to go through that struggle to be able to find ways that you can rely on yourself.
Yeah.
These obstacles, barriers shouldn't exist, and we have more than enough resources to try to alleviate them. But I'm glad that there are people like you, institutions like Lehigh, and other places in our community that try to lessen this gap and really alleviate it. Like you said, it's going to take time, but I also really hope in the future that things get even better, whatever that may look like.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure it'll get better.
I hope so.
Great students.
Yeah, so thank you, Christina, for being here.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed talking with you and getting so much insight about this very diverse issue.
Thank you.
And how we can help. But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Really appreciate you and the organization as well, the initiative. Look forward to hearing the other podcasts too.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
These ideas are all my own creation, and if you're interested in discussing this podcast, please reach out to my email, gmo227@lehigh.edu. Every episode of the Here's the Deal podcast series is produced by Professor Duncan's research group. Questions or concerns about the series can be addressed to him at awd324@lehigh.edu. Thank you so much for listening.